December 26, 1944, late afternoon. The road at Antony, a narrow village south of Bastogne, lay frozen and torn by artillery fire. Snow clung to the hedgerows. The light was already failing when the lead elements of the U.S. 4th Armored Division broke through the German lines. At approximately 4:50 p.m., an American Sherman tank nosed forward, its crew scanning for muzzle flashes, unaware that the moment they were creating would echo far beyond this battered Belgian crossroads. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne paratroopers, exhausted, frostbitten, and nearly out of ammunition, heard unfamiliar engine noise. It was not German. Within minutes, contact was made. The siege was broken. For the German commanders who had encircled the town, the shock was immediate and profound. Bastogne was not supposed to fall quickly, but it was never supposed to be relieved at all. Certainly not in 48 hours. Certainly not in the depths of an Ardennes winter the German High Command believed favored them alone. The German offensive, launched 10 days earlier on December 16th, had been built on assumptions that American units would be slow to react, that winter would paralyze enemy armor, that rapid maneuver under snow and ice remained a uniquely German skill. Bastogne, a vital road junction, had been surrounded by 4 German divisions, including elite panzer units. It was meant to be starved into submission. Instead, an American army had moved with speed, coordination, and ruthless clarity of purpose. At the center of this reversal stood Lieutenant General George S. Patton. Days earlier, he had promised his superiors he could turn his Third Army 90 degrees north and strike toward Bastogne. Many doubted him. Some thought it reckless. German intelligence dismissed it entirely. But now, as German officers received reports of American armor punching through their southern ring, disbelief gave way to something more dangerous: respect. One German staff officer would later admit that this was the moment their certainty collapsed. The Americans had done the impossible, not in theory, not eventually, but now. The snow continued to fall. The road into Bastogne was open, and with it, the illusion of German winter supremacy lay shattered. To understand why the relief of Bastogne struck German commanders so deeply, one must return to the opening hours of the Ardennes Offensive. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, under low clouds and heavy fog, more than 200,000 German troops surged forward across an 80-mile front. Adolf Hitler had wagered what remained of Germany's mobile reserves on one final throw of the dice. The objective was audacious: split the Allied armies, cross the Meuse River, and force a negotiated peace in the West. Speed was everything. So was winter. German planners believed snow, ice, and limited daylight would cripple American air power and immobilize Allied logistics. They believed American commanders would react slowly, bound by rigid planning and overconfidence. Bastogne, sitting astride 7 major roads, was to be seized or isolated early. Without it, the American movement would be choked. But events did not unfold cleanly. American units, surprised but not broken, fell back and regrouped. On December 18th, elements of the 101st Airborne Division were rushed by truck into Bastogne. They arrived without winter clothing, short on artillery shells, and with no clear idea of how long they would be expected to hold. By December 21, Bastogne was fully encircled. German artillery tightened its ring. A surrender demand was delivered to the American commander, Brigadier General Antony McAuliffe. His reply, brief, defiant, and unambiguous, circulated quickly through both armies.
The garrison would not yield. Inside German headquarters, confidence remained high. Their maps showed American Third Army units still facing east, engaged against German forces in Lorraine. Patton, they believed, could not disengage in time. Even if he tried, winter roads and German blocking positions would slow him to a crawl. They underestimated not only Patton's temperament, but also the American system that enabled him. Staff work, logistics, and decentralized command allowed divisions to pivot with remarkable speed. Orders were issued on December 19th. By December 22, American armor was moving north through snowstorms, over narrow forest roads, engines running day and night. German commanders received fragmented reports, skirmishes, probes, increased radio traffic. None of it seemed decisive. Then, on December 24th, German forward units south of Bastogne reported heavy pressure. Tanks, infantry, artillery moving in coordination. Christmas Day passed under fire, and still the Americans advanced. For German officers trained to believe that winter favored discipline, endurance, and experience, qualities they claimed as their own, the realization was unsettling. The enemy was not freezing in place. The enemy was maneuvering.
By December 25, the German command situation around Bastogne had grown tense and confused. Field reports contradicted operational assumptions. Units expected to hold firm were falling back. Fuel shortages worsened. Snow-choked roads that were supposed to hinder the Americans now hindered everyone equally. At the headquarters of the German 5th Panzer Army, officers studied situation maps with increasing unease. Arrows marking American advances pointed northward, directly toward Bastogne. These were not scattered thrusts. They were coordinated, sustained, and aggressively pressed. Interrogations of captured American soldiers confirmed what German intelligence had not wanted to hear. This was Patton's Third Army. Entire divisions had been disengaged, rerouted, and driven through winter terrain in a matter of days. One German operations officer reportedly remarked that the Americans were moving as if the weather did not exist. The psychological shift was subtle but irreversible. German doctrine had long emphasized Bewältigungskrieg, war of movement, even under adverse conditions. Winter warfare was a point of pride, rooted in hard lessons from the Eastern Front. The belief that Anglo-American forces lacked this adaptability had shaped German planning in the Ardennes. Now that belief was collapsing. On the ground, German infantry holding the southern perimeter of Bastogne faced relentless pressure. American artillery found its range. Tanks advanced with infantry riding exposed on hulls, frostbitten but determined. Engineers cleared roads under fire. Supply columns followed close behind, keeping the advance alive. German counterattacks were ordered, but they lacked coordination. Fuel trucks failed to arrive. Communications broke down. The Americans, once expected to be reactive, were dictating tempo. Late on December 25, German divisional commanders warned that the ring around Bastogne could not be maintained without reinforcements that no longer existed. Higher headquarters hesitated. To commit reserves would weaken the main thrust toward the Meuse. To hold a position risked encirclement. This was the dilemma Patton had engineered. When news arrived on December 26th that American armor had broken through near Assenois, the reaction was not outrage, it was silent. One German general later wrote that at that moment we understood the enemy had surpassed us in operational speed. The siege was not fully lifted. Fighting would continue for weeks, but the spell was broken. Winter had not saved them. The decisive truth confronting German commanders on December 26th was not merely that Bastogne had been relieved, but that it had been relieved so quickly that no German countermeasure could meaningfully respond. The choice had already been made. The window had closed. For Patton, the decision that defined the outcome had occurred days earlier in a dimly lit command room on December 19. When asked how long it would take his army to attack north, he answered without hesitation, 3 days. It was not bravado, it was calculation. Roads had been reconnoitered, fuel stocks quietly repositioned, divisions briefed in advance under the guise of contingency planning. What appeared spontaneous was, in fact, prepared audacity. German commanders never believed such a pivot could be executed at scale in winter. On December 22nd, while German officers still debated whether Patton could disengage at all, the Third Army was already moving. Over 130,000 men, hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles, advancing through sleet, snow, and ice. Traffic jams stretched for miles. Accidents were constant. Men froze at their posts, yet the columns did not stop. The German response came too late and in fragments. Orders to hold Bastogne at all costs clashed with the reality of exhausted infantry and empty fuel depots. Panzer divisions designed for exploitation were now reduced to static defense. Pride prevented withdrawal. Doctrine prevented flexibility. When the American breakthrough occurred at Antony, it forced an irreversible reckoning. German commanders faced a battlefield truth they could neither deny nor undo. The Americans had seized the initiative, not through numbers alone, but through operational daring executed with discipline. One senior German officer would later reflect that this moment shattered a long-held illusion. "We believed the Americans required favorable conditions to fight well," he wrote. "They proved they required only a decision." Attempts were made to reseal the corridor. Counterattacks struck the narrow relief route repeatedly in the days that followed. They failed. American artillery dominated the approaches. Air power returned once the skies cleared. Supplies poured into Bastogne. The wounded were evacuated. The defenders were no longer isolated men holding a frozen perimeter. They were once again part of a living army. Inside the German headquarters, the language changed. Reports no longer spoke of delay or containment, but of attrition and loss of momentum. The Ardennes Offensive, conceived as a lightning strike, had become a grinding struggle Germany could not afford. The strategic cost was immense. Fuel reserves intended for the drive west had been burned, holding ground already rendered irrelevant. Elite formations had been bled white. Time, Germany's most precious commodity, had been squandered. And at the center of it all was the realization that Patton's army had not merely reacted, but outmaneuvered them under conditions the Germans once claimed as their own. This was not a setback that could be explained away. It was a verdict. In the weeks that followed the relief of Bastogne, German officers attempted to explain what had gone wrong. Official reports cited fuel shortages, Allied air power, and numerical inferiority. Privately, a deeper admission surfaced. The Americans had matched, and in this moment surpassed, German operational art. By January 1945, the Ardennes Offensive had collapsed. The German armies withdrew eastward, leaving behind shattered divisions and abandoned equipment frozen into the Belgian landscape. Bastogne remained in American hands, its road network now serving the advance rather than resisting it. The cost had been severe on both sides, but the strategic balance had shifted beyond recovery. Captured German generals spoke with unexpected candor during post-war interrogations. Several acknowledged that Patton's maneuver forced a re-evaluation of everything they believed about the American army. One described it as the moment they understood the war in the West was no longer winnable. Not because of defeat in a single battle, but because of the enemy's capacity to learn, adapt, and strike decisively under pressure.
The myth of German winter superiority, earned in earlier wars and reinforced on the Eastern Front, had not survived the Ardennes. The Americans had fought in snow and ice with coordination, resilience, and speed. They had planned under uncertainty and acted without hesitation. This was not the clumsy force German propaganda had long dismissed. For Patton, the relief of Bastogne became a defining chapter in his legend, yet the significance extended far beyond one man's reputation. It marked the point at which German commanders no longer saw the Western Allies as predictable or inferior, but as equals, or worse, as masters of modern maneuver warfare. History would record the Ardennes as Germany's last major offensive in the West. After Bastogne, there would be no more grand gambles, only retreat. The initiative, once lost, was never regained. What happened in those frozen forests was not simply the lifting of a siege, it was the collapse of an assumption that had shaped German strategy for years. When Patton's tanks reached Bastogne in 48 hours, they did more than deliver supplies and reinforcements. They delivered certainty. The certainty that the war's outcome was no longer in question.